Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judah, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the Full10Yards NFL Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Full10Yards NFL Podcast. I'm your host Sam Moores and we are back for yet another season of weekly NFL content. That's because training camp starts in the next week or 10 days or so for the majority of NFL teams, so now seems like the perfect time to bring the podcast back. There's no guest with me today, that fell through at the last minute, so just a short podcast on me this time, but it's great to be back and it's great to be recapping a crazy off-season. Of course, the last time you heard from me was our last podcast back in February, which recapped the Eagles' dominant Super Bowl victory over the Chiefs, and a lot has happened since then. So let's start by recapping the off-season and then getting into the main topic of this podcast. I would have loved to have given my opinion on a crazy off-season, but with regular podcasts, but unfortunately I was tied up with completing the final stages of my degree. I've just completed a degree in sports journalism, so I'm now a fully trained journalist. But now I'm back, I've finished my degree, and the podcast is back for the 2025 season. So to quickly recap the off-season, the New England Patriots and Minnesota Vikings were big spenders in free agency, surrounding their second-year quarterbacks Drake May and JJ McCarthy with lots of talent. Meanwhile, the Tennessee Titans found a young quarterback of their own, selecting Miami quarterback Cam Ward, number 1 overall in April's draft. We've also seen a ton of big trades. Like the Patriots and Vikings, the Bears and the Commanders have massively helped the quarterbacks they selected last year, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, by each making 2 big trades. We saw Laramie Tunsil and Deebo Samuel make their way to Washington, whilst Joe Tooney and Jenna Jackson were both all in front of Williams in Chicago. Elsewhere, the Raiders reunited Geno Smith with Pete Carroll, whilst the Seahawks also shipped DK Metcalf out to Pittsburgh. Finally, whilst the Steelers have upgraded their quarterback, signing Aaron Rodgers to a 1-year deal, replacing Russell Wilson after adding Metcalf, they did have to move on from disgruntled star receiver George Pickens, trading him to the Dallas Cowboys for a package of mid-round picks. But they weren't done there, and that leads us on to the topic of the episode. We'll be talking more about the Steelers in a minute, as they are the talk of the league at the moment for various reasons. As a nice introduction into the 2025 season, I thought it'd be smart to recap 5 of the biggest NFL storylines heading into training camp. We'll start with probably the biggest question of the bunch right now, and that is, heading into 2025 after their blockbuster trade last week, what exactly are the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Miami Dolphins? Now, if you're not aware, last week the Steelers and Dolphins agreed on a rare player-for-player trade that actually included 3 Pro Bowlers. The origin of the trade started a few months back, because for the past few months, the Dolphins' former All-Pro cornerback Jalen Ramsey had been trying to force his way out of South Florida after a breakdown in his relationship with the Dolphins' higher-ups like head coach Mike McDaniel. Due to the $72 million extension that Ramsey signed only last September, trading him from Miami has been incredibly difficult. With Ramsey still a Dolphin after June 1st, the date when his contract was much easier to move on from, it actually looked like a cut, and with it a $10 million dead cap hit for the Dolphins was more likely than the Dolphins receiving any compensation. But enter Jonnu Smith, the Dolphins' only Pro Bowler from the 2024 season, with them 8-9, their first losing season since 2019. Smith had a career year in 2024, racking up the most receptions, yards and touchdowns of his career, and after signing a cheap 2-year deal in free agency last year, he was looking for a new contract to reflect his worth to the team. While Smith was hugely important to the Dolphins and both sides wanted to remain together, when contract talks started, they were unable to meet Smith's demands and he started to be shopped around the league. At the end of May, Adam Schefter reported that the Steelers and Dolphins had actually engaged in a phone call over a potential trade for Smith, reuniting him with Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, who he has coached in multiple destinations. Those calls didn't turn into anything until last week, when Smith was included in a deal that sent Ramsey to Pittsburgh, and in return the Dolphins received All-Pro safety Minkah Fitzpatrick. He actually returns to the organisation that drafted him in 2018, along with a couple of mid to late round picks in future years. So after this big trade, which sees both teams moving on from star players, I think one of the biggest storylines to watch this preseason is how each team navigates training camp. I like the trade for both teams. The Dolphins were going to move on from both players anyway, and I didn't think they'd get the compensation that they got in Fitzpatrick. And obviously they managed to get a player that they really liked back, obviously drafting him with the 11th overall pick in 2018. Chris Greer didn't want to move on from Fitzpatrick in the first place. If you remember, the reason why he left Miami and became a Steeler was because he fell out with the former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores, who wanted to use him as more of a Swiss Army knife, whereas Fitzpatrick wanted to be sitting at the deep safety position. And as for Pittsburgh, they are kind of in win now mode, and they've added 2 pieces, so it kind of makes sense that, you know, they have lost Fitzpatrick, but they've added a player who will be a Swiss Army knife to add to the players they've already got on defense, which is that secondary for the Pittsburgh Steelers is much better than the Dolphins, for example. And they're a fascinating team for me this year, because this run of no losing seasons that Mike Tomlin somehow keeps managing to continue every year is great and all, but they're going nowhere. They really are. Until this year, they've really started to try and change that this year. You know, they've always been too good to be in a position to upgrade at the one position that they've needed for years, quarterback. But they've also been lacking that quarterback to win them the playoff game. So they've sort of been in like a bit of no man land, really. Since they last won a playoff game, they've won the AFC North twice. They've reached the playoffs 3 more times. And that was all back in January 2017, the 2016 season, the last time the Steelers won a playoff game. So it's certainly a crazy streak for them, 6 playoff losses in a row. So they've really tried to change that. They've acquired picks in future drafts recently, and they've positioned themselves to hopefully finally get their franchise quarterback in the future. And in the meantime, they can try and get one final good year of Aaron Rodgers and go and win something this year potentially. I still think they're a little step down to some of the higher ups in the AFC, but they're certainly right up there. We saw that last year. They were in a position to win the division at one point last year. They've got some excellent players. Now, of course, with Aaron Rodgers, he's Aaron Rodgers. So what will happen? He caused a ton of drama in New York last year. But if you look at what Rodgers purely did on the field, he really wasn't that bad at all. In fact, his numbers were much closer to the top 10 that we expect from Aaron Rodgers than the bottom of the league. That's with all of this dysfunction that was in New York last year. And obviously, he did cause some of that. And that, so I'm interested to see how his personality gels with the personality that Mike Tomlin has and it's worked so well. And they always know when to move on from a player, because of personality reasons and stuff. A player that has that much baggage with him already, I'm fascinated to see how he gels in Pittsburgh. I can't wait to see it. So that's why for me, seeing that relationship develop in training camp is something you just cannot miss this off season. As for the Dolphins, they too are in a very weird spot. They've only had 1 losing season in their 3 seasons with Mike McDaniel, and they've had 2 losing seasons since Chris Greer took full control of the team as GM after Adam Gase and Mike Tannenbaum were dismissed in 2018. But the pressure is really on for both of those individuals because the Dolphins have not been able to get it done at the end of the season. That is despite having 4 winning seasons in the last 5 years. They currently hold the longest playoff win drought, which stands at 24 seasons. This regime has a reputation for being soft, and it's going to be incredibly hard to shift that unless they win a playoff game and Tua stays healthy to play in that game. So there's so many eyes on McDaniel and Greer and how this team looks this offseason because they are in the hottest of hot states, and this team has also lost a ton of leaders. They've lost some good eggs like Jonnu Smith and Teron Armstead and Calais Campbell. They've lost some bad eggs like Jalen Ramsey and some other players who are no longer in the building. For me, I'm fascinated to see what happens and how this culture builds because it has to be a good one. Otherwise, this regime are out the door in Miami. For them, this offseason has been about getting more physical and changing their culture. How this team gets ready for a very high-pressure season absolutely fascinates me, and that's something I can't wait to see. Right, on to my second big storyline to follow this preseason, and that is the goings-on in each of the quarterback battles across the league. Right now, most people seem to believe there are either 3 or 4 quarterback battles going on in the league. I'm more siding with 3. I think there are 3 legitimate battles going into this training camp. And we'll start with the most intriguing of the bunch, which is also the biggest battle of training camp, with 4 quarterbacks fighting for the chance of being the Week 1 starter of the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland still has Deshaun Watson under contract, that horrendous contract for 2 more seasons, but they will start a new quarterback in 2025 as Watson recovers from the ruptured Achilles that he got at the end of the last season. In the off-season, Cleveland added Joe Flacco and traded for Kenny Pickett, with the expectation of adding a highly drafted rookie to compete for the job in the summer too. And up until about a week or so before the draft, the expectation was that the Browns would draft Shedeur Sanders with their first-round pick. But as the process went on, Sanders began to fall for off-the-field reasons, and it looked like they wouldn't be going quarterback at number 2 overall at all. Instead, they actually traded back with Jacksonville, who went up to get Travis Hunter, and the Jags gave the Browns a package that they couldn't turn down, which included picks in future years, which have deeper quarterback draft classes. Obviously, after Sanders fell out the first round, many thought Cleveland would take him early on day 2, but that wasn't the case. They ended up taking a different rookie on day 2, Dylan Gabriel. But as Sanders shockingly fell all the way to the 5th round, they decided to give the projected first rounder a chance to prove himself as a quarterback and as a leader of an NFL franchise. So by the sounds of it, the Browns have set up a genuine 4-person battle to be their quarterback in 2025. If I was to guess who was to win the battle going into training camp, I'd say Joe Flacco. A big reason behind that is the fact that he was in the building before, back in 2023. Obviously, he led the team to a surprising playoff visit that year as well. And I believe he'll have the support of the veterans in that building as well. I think Myles Garrett has already come out and said that he thinks it'll be Flacco. Many of those players still remain from 2023 as well. So I think Flacco makes sense. Now, of course, as well, he also knows this offense better than the others too. The only one that was in the building before. So heading into week 1, that might be key to winning the battle. I'm not certain on Flacco though. I think it makes the most sense. I think it really does make sense. But some beat reporters in Cleveland seem really high on Kenny Pickett. Some seem low on him. So he's an interesting name to watch. As obviously are the 2 rookies, of course, as well. They could step into training camp after mini camp OTAs and absolutely ball out. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see all the quarterbacks that end up remaining on the roster after the cut down day given the chance to start at some point. Some may say give the rookies a chance and see what you have going into next year, where you'll probably have a high pick as well. But it sounds like Andrew Berry and somehow Kevin Stefanski, who I think is a great coach, it sounds like their jobs are really not certain. So I think for their jobs, they'll have to play Flacco and try and win at least a few games going into the year where they go pick a future starting quarterback should Sanders or Gabriel not fit the bill. I'm just, again, I keep saying fascinated, but I really am. For me, I've never seen anything like a QB battle this big before. So I can't wait to follow it as it goes on. I'm actually really jealous of the journalists covering the Browns right now because of that reason. I just want to know what's happening and to see how they navigate this situation, because truly anything can happen for the Browns in that aspect over the next 8 weeks or so. Moving on from Cleveland, the Saints also have a starting quarterback role up for grabs too, following the shock retirement of Derek Carr. Absolutely no idea who starts it, if I'm being honest. Absolutely no idea. But one thing I am certain on is the fact that they have easily the worst quarterback room in the league. Trying to pick between Jake Hayner, Spencer Rattler and rookie quarterback Tyler Shuck doesn't exactly excite me, I'm afraid, Saints fans. I'm sorry. But I actually think that Carr retiring may help your organisation in the long run, because without that, I'm not sure that they'll be in a position to select a top quarterback like they may be next year. If I were to pick who would start, I would probably go for Rattler, because I feel like he's got the highest upside out of those 3 guys in the room. Many people I speak to, like for example Liam Horsley, who's a frequent guest on the podcast, they all love his tools, and they loved him. He was a very, very highly 5-star recruit coming out of high school, going into college. He's been a known name across America for a while. A lot of people love Spencer Rattler, for his play, and he's had a bit of an up and down time since then. Obviously, he got his chance to start a couple of games last year as well. But I would go for him. Obviously he's probably the most raw as well. But to me, I feel like if you think a guy got talent and you're not going to win games this year, at least develop a guy. You're a first year. I don't think Mickey Loomis is going anywhere. First year head coach. You may as well see what you have and then and then start next year. You know, think for example like the Dolphins did with Chris Greer and Brian Flores in 2019. They experimented a lot because they knew they wouldn't be very good. And look at the Cardinals as well, for example, another example of that previously as well. You may as well experiment. And if Rattler does play well, but you're in a position to select one of the sort of four or five first round quarterbacks that are expected next year, then you can always move him for a pick and then make the rest of your team better as well. So for me, it makes sense to play him. For me, I thought, yeah, it's just the obvious. Obviously, for me, that seems like the obvious thing to do, but it truly doesn't seem that they know yet. So the story is definitely something to follow in the next few weeks before the first round of preseason games. Like with his 7-year college experience, Tyler Shuck, the rookie, he may actually be the best option, and he probably is the best fit for Kellen Moore's offense. And of course, Jake Hayner, he was in the building before. He's had starts under his belts too. I wouldn't rule his name out, but he has had a setback in minicamp during the off-season program. So I'd say he's probably the least likely of the three to start. But should he be healthy, I wouldn't rule him out either. But the Saints just fascinating to see, again, out of the worst quarterback room in the league, which person does start. Because truly, I don't feel like any of these three guys are the future of the Saints franchise. So seeing how they navigate that, to me, will be very, very interesting. And then the other quarterback competition that I think is serious is actually the one in Indianapolis. The Colts already added Daniel Jones to compete with their 2023 first-round pick, Anthony Richardson, this offseason, who obviously has a ton of talent but hasn't been able to stay healthy. And then in the offseason, since adding Jones, Richardson's already picked up another injury, one to the same shoulder that he had surgically repaired following his rookie year. So, he was forced to miss mandatory minicamp, given Jones time with the ones, and should he miss time in training camp, which might happen, then Dow Jones will get a chance to take a claim for the job to start in week 1 because look, these two injury-plagued off-seasons really haven't helped Richardson, right? He was seen as a project quarterback in the first place. The off-seasons that he should have been spent, retooling and relearning his mechanics because they've been a mess. And they were a mess coming in. It's always the thing that they had to fix. The off seasons that he should have been doing that. Instead, he's been rehabbing. So he's really on the back foot. So going into year 3, he isn't far from the quarterback he was when he was drafted because he spent so much time rehabbing. This is a complicated battle. It absolutely should be Richardson if he is healthy because the Colts have to find out who they invested in and getting them more reps to get better. And I think he eventually will end up playing the most games for the Colts. But to start the year, we could see Daniel Jones because although Richardson's tools are hard to pass, if he isn't that healthy, Jones also has some of those tools and is a better intermediate and close range passer as well. If he still isn't 100% in a few weeks' time, there may be a legitimate battle to start week 1, and then I can't imagine Daniel Jones lasting a season because he'll do something, or the Colts will be in a situation where they think, we're out of it, we'll play Richardson again and see what we have, and give him one final chance, similar to what Bryce Young had in Carolina last year, and that obviously that worked out great for Bryce Young. I really do think if he's not 100% in a few weeks' time, there'll be a legitimate battle, at least to start the season, which I think Daniel Jones could win. But seeing what happens there will be fascinating. And then finally, there may end up being a battle for the starting job for the Giants. Some people think that could happen, but personally for me, I think this one isn't as likely as some may think, as it sounds like it's Russell Wilson's job to lose. Firstly, he is a great fit for Brian Daboll's offense, which I think already puts the other two quarterbacks, Jameis Winston and Ricky Jackson, at a disadvantage. Wilson also took reps with the ones during the off-season programs as well, and Daboll has also publicly said that he is the starter on multiple occasions too. So it sounds like it will be Russell Wilson's job. Now, I'm not saying we won't see Dart or Winston at all this year. In fact, I honestly wouldn't be shocked to see if we see all three quarterbacks. Maybe Tommy DeVito too, if one of them gets injured. But because Daboll and GM Joe Shane are on very, very hot seats, and they see Wilson as the quarterback that gives them the best chance of winning games, it makes too much sense to not start in week 1 at least, and then see where you are at the end of the year. Maybe they're five games in, then we'll see Jackson Dart play. Maybe we'll get Jameis to finish some games off, or something like that. I can see scenarios like that happening. But for me, I think it'll be Russell Wilson in week 1 for the Giants. Now, alongside the quarterback battles, every year we traditionally see star players threaten to hold out of training camp to try and force their organisations to extend or maybe rework their contracts with a payday that they feel is earned. In some cases, these players may have been pushing for a trade because they know they're not going to get a contract for that team. This year is no different, as heading into training camp next year, there are several contract disputes across the league. Some of those players that are looking for fresh terms include Minkah Parsons, TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson of the Cowboys, Steelers and Bengals, and there's some other players as well. But we'll start with those three. There are, of course, big, huge names as well, but we'll start with those three. The two biggest names of the bunch, Minkah Parsons and TJ Watt, will go through first. Two players that you could argue maybe even 2 of the 5 best players in the entire league. They are both looking for a new contract. Now, Minkah Parsons was absent from the Cowboys OTAs in May, which are voluntary, but he was there for mandatory minicamp in June. Surprisingly, Minkah Parsons is still on his rookie deal, which, bear in mind he's been in the league so long and he's been a star player that, for the last 3-4 years he's been one of the best players in the league. You're seeing that he's still on his rookie deal. Obviously, just shows how tight the Cowboys have had to be at their cap and all the stars have had to pay the last couple of years. But the time is now, after CeeDee Lamb got paid, after Dak got paid, it is now time for Minkah Parsons to get paid. As it stands, Parsons is set to be a free agent this offseason. They are hoping to do the deal soon. Both sides want Parsons to remain in Dallas, but the lack of urgency at the moment to extend him has raised questions as to whether Parsons may potentially hold out a training camp until a new deal is agreed. Now, he has already said that in an interview that he will be attending training camp, obviously avoiding the daily £50,000 fine in the collective bargaining agreement that players receive should they miss camp for without an excuse, essentially. Now, he's already said he will be going there, but it sounds like he may hold in, so not take part in any team activities or anything like that. It's a new trend, which basically gets players out. It means they can still hold out, but not physically hold out and get fined by the NFL PA. So basically, you can still refuse. You can still go there, but you can refuse to take part in team activities, basically without repercussion. That's basically the way it works. And that's to try and force a deal. And as I said, both sides want to get the deal done. This will probably most likely make Parsons the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. I think it'll be a deal about $40 million a year. And again, it sounds like this one could get going soon, maybe before training camp, but it is something to watch if it's not done in the next 2 weeks or so. For him, it's more when, not if. I think it is the case with TJ Watt too, but I think it is slightly more complicated for him. Like Parsons, both sides want to get the deal done. The Steelers really want to keep TJ Watt, obviously, and TJ Watt wants to remain where a place where he's won a couple of defensive player of the years and etc. I do think this deal will eventually get done, but it does sound like the Parsons deal is closer at the moment. Obviously, for Watt, he's heading into his third contract rather than a second contract after already becoming the highest paid defensive player in 2021. But he will turn 31 in October, so there's that factor. And while it does sound like a deal will get done eventually, it sounds like Watt may be more likely to hold out than Parsons in order to force a deal, because it doesn't seem like it is getting close at all. And he did that in 2021 to get that deal as well, where it was signed on the eve of the season. Meanwhile, there's a deal that looks nowhere near getting done. That's between the Steelers' division rivals, the Cincinnati Bengals, and their star pass rusher, Trey Hendrickson. Now this one looks nowhere near at this current point in time. He has aired his frustrations. Hendrickson has the fact that they're nowhere near agreeing a deal, threatening to not play in 2025 without a contract extension. The breakdown in talks with Hendrickson and the Bengals seems to be over guaranteed money, with Hendrickson for multiple years of guaranteed money. something the Bengals are more likely to steer clear of than other teams. It's something that they're well known for. That situation is certainly something to watch in the coming weeks as to what happens with Hendrickson, because obviously he's a star player. The Bengals have just drafted Shamar Stewart as insurance for him in that position, which we'll talk about him later, because he's got another scenario as well. But no, for Hendrickson, I mean, look, to be honest with you, this deal's been, this is not a recent thing. This has been going on for at least a year now. Hendrickson trying to get the money he's earned. Obviously, he's led the league in sacks, and he's had a very before, and he's had a very productive couple of years. Hendrickson's a great player, and he is by far the best player on their defense. But the Bengals have just paid Joe Burrow. Well, no, not just paid Joe Burrow, but they've paid Burrow recently. They have just paid Jamar Chase. They have just paid T. Higgins. Unfortunately for those guys have taken up a big chunk of the salary cap for the Bengals. So I don't know. I don't know if this one gets done. I think I can see Hendrickson getting traded, and that's been talked about for a while. But seeing if he will hold out, is certainly something to watch. I feel like he probably will hold out with how frustrated he is. Basically, it's certainly something to watch in the next coming weeks or so. Now, elsewhere, two big offensive players are also involved in contract disputes with their teams as they enter the final year of their current deals. There's a Commanders receiver, Terry McLaurin. He's coming to the end of his second contract in Washington, whilst Bills running back James Cook, who they drafted in 2022, is entering the final year of his rookie deal. And these contract talks have been quite public compared to other guys that are due to enter free agency because of how valuable these guys are to their teams. And they both, I don't know if they're going to hold out, but they both are campaigning for a new contract heading into training camp. Now, these two also sound a lot less imminent than Parsons' extension, which I think will be done soon. James Cook is, and it's because James Cook is looking for a big contract after the recent renaissance in the value of running backs after a big year for Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry last year. Whilst McLaurin is upset by the lack of momentum in talks, he feels like Washington aren't really that invested in getting the deal done as he is, and he may hold out a training camp for that reason after already missing mandatory minicamp in June. One final thing to look out for is if any of the 2022 draft class signs a new deal. Now, they're sort of eligible for an extension now. Rashawn Slater is one who's been talked about a lot because of how valuable he is to the Chargers, and Hutchinson the same way, same as Sauce Gardner with the Jets. It'll be interesting to see if any of these guys agree to a new contract ahead of next season, where they will be properly bargaining for a new contract when they're playing on their 5th year option. Okay, we're going on to our fourth big storyline to watch this offseason. Staying on the theme of contracts, the fourth story to follow during training camp is the situation with all the unsigned rookie contracts by this year's, obviously, draft picks. There's been a load of rookie contract holdouts, way more than normal. Every year there are usually a couple of players going into camp who take longer than most to sign a contract, normally for like injury reasons and stuff in contracts. But everything in the end gets sorted eventually because every rookie has a set fee based on where they are drafted and stuff. There are very little things to negotiate in a rookie contract. But at the moment, there are two situations that are stalling negotiations of several players that were selected in the first round of this year's draft and the second round of this year's draft as well. Now, 30 of the 32 first-round picks have signed. They're done, they're everything, with only Broncos cornerback Jahdae Barron and Bengals edge Shamar Stewart, who I mentioned earlier, unsigned as first-round picks. And whilst Barron looks to be a sort of normal dispute that I think will get done eventually, will get resolved eventually, Shamar Stewart's situation is a strange one. As with Hendrickson, that dispute actually comes down to guaranteed money for the Bengals. With their rookie contracts this year, the Bengals are trying to rephrase some wording in the agreement, and the other rookies are signed to that, which will allow the team to basically void future guarantees. This has not been present in the contracts of their previous few first-round picks, which Shamar Stewart has taken issue with, making the dispute very public. He is refusing to practice for the Bengals until they make a U-turn on their new proposal. And I think the Bengals will eventually give in because they risk potentially being down 2 pass rushes to start the season. But yeah, this is just a fascinating scenario. Obviously, you can see where Stewart and his agent are coming from, because why should they start this with him, their highest drafted player since Jamar Chase in 2021? Why should they start this with a contract for first-round picks? It's not been in the contract of the last 2 first-round picks, so you can absolutely see where they are coming from. but the situation has escalated so much, and Stewart's a lot of the reason why because of that. So seeing how that situation develops will be very, very interesting for sure, because this is a big standoff, and some big words are being said by Stewart. For example, he's not backing down. I think it will eventually be the Bengals that back down. But I just they can't have these two scenarios going on at once going to training camp. Eventually, one of them is going to end, and I feel like the Stewart one, they're more likely to give in to Stewart than they are Hendrickson. So I personally think that's what their priority will be going into the off season. So I think that's the most likely one to get. Now let's move on to the second sort of contract scenario to watch. Now that actually includes 30 of the 32 second round picks. Only 2 second round picks, remarkably, have signed. The 33rd overall pick, Carson Schwezinger, and 34th overall pick, Jaden Higgins. They've both put their signature on the dotted line of their rookie contracts so far. But only those 2 guys. And why is that? Well, the league and NFL agents are actually at a bit of a standoff at the moment, because the Browns and Texans have started a new precedent that the rest of the league basically aren't happy with. Traditionally, only first-round picks get their rookie contract fully guaranteed, but the Texans gave Higgins the first ever fully guaranteed contract for a second-round pick in early May, and then a day later, Schwezinger got the same from the Browns. Because, as I mentioned, because salaries are already predetermined based on what number the player was selected and everything, the only thing holding back the other 30 second-round picks from signing really is this dispute over guaranteed contracts. Now that those 2 players have got a fully guaranteed contract as a second round pick, now every player and every agent believes they should also get one, and now we're sort of at a standstill until one side gives in. Now, eventually someone will give in. It's just the way it works, and someone will either take the normal contract for a second round pick, or a team will be desperate to get their player signed and taken part and stuff. And then I expect that if they do give in, then I expect everyone will get a fully guaranteed contract. We're just waiting for one person on either side to basically get fed up. But there is an absolute massive standoff between the NFL front offices and players and agents based on the second round pick guarantee. So that's something to watch certainly over the next couple of weeks, because it does not. This is getting resolved anytime soon, but it will, because obviously you have to have a contract to play. Eventually these deals are going to get signed. It's just how and when in training camp they are going to get signed, and how many of these deals are going to be guaranteed. That's the interesting thing to look out for this training camp. Finally, as always, some terrific veterans remain unsigned. And after going inside in the first wave of free agency and a second wave of free agency as well, they've decided to wait until training camp starts to choose their next teams. So where the big name free agents sign is the 5th and final thing to look out for this off-season. Now, among those available are former Bills, Cowboys and Browns receiver Amari Cooper, former Bears and Chargers receiver Keenan Allen, former Bills and Jaguars receiver Gabe Davis, former Defensive Player of the Year cornerback Stephon Gilmore, former Bills and Packers cornerback Rasul Douglas, former Chargers cornerback Asante Samuel Jr., former Broncos safety Justin Simmons, and former Bengals and Steelers defensive back Mike Hilton. There's also the former number 1 overall pick pass rusher Jadeveon Clowney, as well as Zadarius Smith and Matthew Judon available as well. And then there's also the likes of Marcus Williams, Kendall Fuller and Julian Blackmore too, and a few interior linemen such as Brandon Scherf and Will Hernandez. Now, the expectation is that the majority of these players will get signed in the next few weeks of training camps begin, except for the likes of Asante Samuel, who will go into camp carrying an injury. Some will go into camp carrying an injury and may not get signed, but many of these players will be on a team next year. It's just essentially they're cheaper and they can. It's just how it works. So you miss the first 2 weeks of free agency and you sign in camp and you go to a team in camp. I think the corners will go pretty quickly because there are quite a few cornerback needy teams. For example, the Dolphins and the Packers often losing the likes of Jalen Ramsey and Jair Alexander. Those guys will be looking for corners. Both Gilmore and Douglas as well. Obviously, Samuel's injured. These two are the main 2 guys that actually might get some sort of decent money from one of these teams. Both Stephon Gilmore and Rasul Douglas can play at a very high level still. We saw that last year, so they'll both have their suitors in a couple of weeks. I'm sure of that. And then eventually, after his there's medical, as I understand, he will sign for a team as well, and he will play towards the end of next season at least. I think. I'm also fascinated to see where the receivers go. I really am, because you look at these guys here: Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Gabe Davis. A year ago, these guys were looking pretty on deals. At least were highly sought after last off season. Well, now the three of them are available again. They're quite high stocks last year. This year, they weren't great last year, and then this year they're still not signed going to training camp. Again, all three guys will get picked up, and a lot of the time as well, it's if a player gets injured in camp. So, for example, say Jalen Waddle goes down for the Miami Dolphins, then they could go and pick up maybe Keenan Allen, who I think will be a good fit there, or say one of the Bills receivers goes down, maybe they go back and pick up Gabe Davis, or maybe they go back and pick up Amari Cooper. Those sort of scenarios will happen. It's just a waiting game for these players. But again, looking at these players, they are big name players. All these players have, some of them are Pro Bowlers, some of them are again Defensive Player of the Year, number one picks. So these are big name players, and they will go to teams. Seeing where these players go, for me, will be a really interesting story this off season. If there is anyone that you can see being a fit with a particular team, let me know in the comments below. And we'll come back to those predictions in our divisional preview podcast to see, did they sign here, did they sign there, etc. Do get involved because again, a lot of these players could go absolutely anywhere, really. So there you have it, 5 of the biggest storylines heading into training camp, which begins next week for the rookies of most teams. That's all for the podcast today. It's been great to be back. I've really, really enjoyed this little chat with you guys. We've got lots coming as we get closer to the season, so stay tuned for more podcasts in the coming weeks. There'll be one next week for you guys. And if you have watched the episode on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. So many of you guys actually aren't subscribed. You can see that by looking at our statistics. So make sure that you do that if you do want to get notified for the release of the next podcast next week. Or if you've been listening on podcast platforms, make sure to follow our feed and leave a review as well, so we can hit the algorithms of those platforms. We are back for we are back for good. We are back until the end of the season. For the first time this season, I'm Sam Moores, and thank you for listening to the Full 10 Yards NFL Podcast. I'll be back for another episode with another guest very, very soon.